Like most kids in the 70s and 80s, I didn't have many rules when it came to playing outside. I was free to roam all over my neighborhood, as long as my parents had a general idea where I was, and I was home by a certain time. I lived in a small town in the southern United States, so even though there was crime in my town, it was relatively rare, not to mention parents were much more likely to give their kids a lot more freedom back then. I loved riding my bike. It was a cheap huffy dirt bike, black with orange plastic dirt fenders. I didn't have many friends when I was a kid, so I didn't have to worry much about being made fun of for my cheap little bike. And it always got me where I wanted to go, so it was always good to me. I spent my weekends riding that bike everywhere in my neighborhood by myself, up and down the streets near my house or jumping curbs at the elementary school that was several blocks away. The only rule my parents gave me in particular was I could not ride my bike to the busiest road near my house, Spring Street. This road had several businesses on it, including an arcade, which may seem old-fashioned today, but for a kid growing up in the 80s and the Atari revolution, having an arcade nearby was just about as good as it could get. The only problem was, in order to get to the arcade, I had to cross Spring Street, the one thing I was told I wasn't allowed to do, ever. This story took place when I was about 10 years old. I remember that I saved up my lunch money for the week, $1 per day. I'm not sure if I was on the reduced lunch plan for poor kids, or it was just that cheap to pay for lunch back in the 80s at school, but I saved up $5 because I could get 4 free tokens for $5, for a total of 24 at the arcade, which again could entertain me for hours and hours. I put my money in my pocket, told my mum I was going to ride around in the neighborhood, got my bike and started off for the arcade. I lived in a small neighborhood that was oddly separated from this big road, Spring Street. Imagine building a neighborhood in The Sims, sort of far away from everything else, and only had 2 roads connecting to the main road. That was how my neighborhood was. There were 2 roads that connected my neighborhood to Spring Street. One of them was busy, moderate traffic with lots of houses on the way, and pretty much was a straight shot to the arcade. However, I knew that if my parents were to drive towards Spring Street, that would be the route that they would take, so I decided to go the back way, towards Spring Street. The other backway road was very quiet, almost no traffic, and was beset on both sides by large bushes, trees, and a big creek. To my knowledge, there was only one house on this road. I didn't ride my bike there much because it was creepy, and my parents never drove down that road when accessing Spring Street. So, in spite of the creepiness of the road, I knew my parents would never drive down it. And hey, the arcade was calling my name. So off I went, down this back road. I would say this road was about 2 miles long from the edge of my neighborhood to Spring Street, with the arcade a little further down once you reached the main road. I noticed as I was winding through the streets in my neighborhood that a large blue pickup truck was riding around sort of aimlessly through the streets, as if the person in the truck was looking for something or someone. I saw it 2 or 3 times on the way back to the road. Although it wasn't following me seemingly, it was zigzagging through my neighborhood and met me at different points on the way to this back road. Again, maybe 2 or 3 times. I didn't think much about it and didn't pay attention to who was in the truck because I was focused on 2 things: not letting my parents find out I was breaking their only rule and getting to the arcade. When I got to the backway road, I turned onto the road and was happy that I was closer to the arcade. One thing I forgot to mention about this road is that there were no exits, no side roads, no turnoffs. From my neighborhood to Spring Street, there was just the one house. I turned onto the road and made it about half a mile down the road when I heard a noise behind me. It was the sound of an engine. I thought it was a little odd because I didn't think I'd ever seen a car in that road before, but kept pedaling away and moved a little bit over to the side to allow this car to pass. As I kept riding, I turned around and saw that it wasn't a car. It was the truck that I'd seen roaming around my neighborhood just a minute before. In my mind, the truck looked like the one that Lamont drove in the opening credits of Stanford and Son. It was old looking, maybe a truck from the 50s or 60s. The truck was light blue. It had a big, round hood and huge headlights. The car was rusted in places and made a heavy, distinctive sound. I thought that the people in the truck were just having a good time on a Saturday morning driving around and it would pass me by quickly. But it didn't. Within a few moments, the truck was right behind me, riding my back bike bumper about 15 feet behind. The odd thing was that the truck was keeping pace with me, not getting any closer or not getting any further behind. I thought perhaps I wasn't giving the truck enough room to pass, so I moved over as far as I could without falling off the asphalt into the bushes and trees. But the truck did not speed up or try to pass me. I tried to speed up and the truck sped up with me. I tried to slow down and the truck backed off with me. No matter what I did, the truck stayed about 15 feet behind me. This continued for about another half a mile. Now, that doesn't seem like a long way, but for a 10-year-old kid on a bike on a lonely road with a creepy truck following behind, it seemed like forever. Remember that I said that the only thing on this road besides the bushes and the trees was a single house? Well, I turned a curve and saw that this single house was ahead of me, several hundred feet away. I knew that my dad was friends with the guy who owned this house, but as a young kid, I didn't know the guy's name or anyone in his family. I decided I was going to speed up suddenly and take off for the driveway of the house, which I did. As soon as I took off quickly, the truck, almost as if it had been taken off guard, sped up and chased me toward the house. It didn't pass me, but it did get extremely close to my back tire this time, maybe 5 or 6 feet away. But it didn't try to hit me. I turned and looked into the truck and saw an older man with glasses, small and squinting eyes, with a hat, and it looked like he was wearing overalls. I am sorry to keep bringing up the 80s references, but he kind of looked like the grandpa on Hee Haw. I sped up for one last rush with the driveway very close now. In this moment, I was really panicking, but somehow I was able to get my thoughts together enough to come up with a plan. I was going to rush into the driveway and pretend like this house was my house and see what happened. I turned into the driveway and rode up towards the front door. The man in the blue truck pulled his truck up perpendicular to the driveway and the road so I could not go back or escape. There was a wall and bushes along the sides of the driveway, so with his truck extending the length of the opening of the drive, I was stuck. I got off my bike for a moment and pretended to look at the bike as if I were repairing it, playing with the spokes and chain. I looked down at the truck, trying not to panic, and I heard his truck door open. He got out and started to walk around the front of the truck. I was about 20 feet or so away from the front door from the house. I decided that I would walk to the house and just open the door. I would walk in and tell the owner of the house who I was and what was happening. I just hoped that they would understand. To make this even more terrifying for a young kid, I noticed that this creepy man had a limp. He made it around the truck and was stumbling towards me. I kept looking over my shoulder at him as I walked toward the front door of the house. His face was empty, no emotion at all except a possible anger, and then he said in a blank tone,
"Where you going, son?"
I can still hear his voice in my head, right now. I turned and run-walked the rest of the way up the driveway to the front door of the house without answering him. The man stopped abruptly and turned quickly back toward the driver's seat of his truck. As he hobbled back, he kept repeating what sounded like, "I'm back, I'm going back." Though I was so frightened, I was paying more attention to getting to the door of the house, so I cannot say for sure exactly what he was saying. I began to walk up the stairs of the porch and heard him get back into the truck cab. As I got to the door and reached my hand up to the doorknob, I heard him punch the gas on his truck and spin his tires as he drove away. I grabbed the door handle, turned the knob, and it was locked. No one was home. I panicked and lost my breath, then began sobbing uncontrollably. The guy in the truck was so scary looking, and his weird, empty voice and limp was terrifying. When he drove away at that moment, and I reached for the handle of the door, that was enough to break me up emotionally. I just sat down on the porch and cried for a second, partially in relief and partially because I was so scared. I knew that the guy may come back, so I had a terrible choice to make. This house was about halfway in between my neighborhood and Spring Street, so I had to decide which route would get me to safety most quickly. I decided to ride back towards my house, and on the way back to my neighborhood, I saw another car coming my way on this lonely road. Terrified and unable to keep myself together, I just threw my bike down and ran up the embankment on the side of the road about 10 feet or so, sat down, put my head in my hands, and started weeping again in fear. The car coming my way thought it was odd, and they slowed down and asked if I was okay. I did not answer, but kept crying. There was a man driving, a woman in the passenger seat, 2 kids in the back seat. I recognized then that it was the owners of the house on the road, my dad's friend, but I didn't remember their names, nor do I now. The woman got out of the car and asked again if I was okay. I explained to her what had happened, and she side-hugged me and rubbed my hair to calm me down. Because I had known who they were, and they knew my dad, the guy in the car put my bike in his trunk and drove me back to my house. When we got back to my house, the lady told my mum what had happened. My mum kind of comforted me. This family and my mum seemed to want to play down the incident as if I were making it up, or I was likely misunderstanding what had happened, so that made me even more upset. The lady said that she didn't know anyone with a blue truck, so that person had no business stopping at their house, so it may be a good idea to call the police. My mum was more angry, of course, that I had tried to ride my bike to Spring Street, so no police were called. I never saw the truck or the scary old dude again, but that incident scared me for many years, and still freaks me out whenever I think about it too much.